anxietycenter.com.
So, I have been seeing a coach through the Anxiety Center for almost 2 years, and it took a while for me to kind of start understanding what type of anxiety I was dealing with. So, um, it is a form of health anxiety, and based on what I've been noticing, it seems to be somatic symptoms disorder. So what's confusing to me about that is that I don't really have sensations or symptoms that pop up that I don't understand the cause of why it popped up. Usually when something happens to me, my fear is built around something that has happened. So, like if I go to the doctor and they do a procedure, say a dental procedure in my mouth, I'll start becoming fixated in that area. And then I'll notice that I'll start having symptoms in that area. If I perceive that I've injured myself in some other way, I start fixating on that area, and that area of my body does start displaying symptoms. And all these symptoms seem to last longer than the actual injury. So I know how this started. It's because I did have a bad incident with a medical procedure years ago. And as a result of anxiety and fear over that procedure and how it went, I started developing anxiety symptoms. So I guess because sometimes my fears are associated with actual events, and the symptoms that result, I'm not sure how the recommendations to just relax, or I guess I'm just not sure how, because like I said, it's been 2 years. I'm not losing the fear. I'm not sure how to lose the fear when something happens to me that is triggered as an injury. My mind says this is an injury to be scared about.
Right, yeah. Can I ask how long you worked with one of our therapists? Like how many sessions do you think you had?
Almost 2 years, maybe 20 months.
You met regularly for 20 months?
We may have taken a break for, which I requested, 6 months within that period. But since then, it's been about a year.
Okay. I just get a sense of, what may have happened during the discussions that you had with one of our therapists. Without telling too much about the medical incident that first scared you, can you give me just a little sense of what that was?
I can tell you. It's nothing too personal. I went to see a doctor. It was an eye doctor, and I was actually considering LASIK surgery, but I wasn't comfortable with LASIK surgery. So there was another procedure that would kind of give that result of clear vision, but and it seemed safer. So when I went, and it had to do with contact lenses. So after the doctor gave me the contact lenses, and I wore them, it distorted my vision after I took the lenses off. They were kind of like a hard contact lens, but I didn't think the procedure wasn't anything but safe.
Right.
I told the doctor about it, but he said continue wearing the lenses. So I wore the lenses for another week, but I wasn't comfortable because it distorted my vision. And then when I realized that after 2 weeks of not wearing the contacts, a month, 3 months of not wearing the contacts. My vision never went back to normal. Um, the anxiety started happening. I didn't know it was anxiety because I didn't know about anxiety. I started having backaches. I started having headaches. I started having eye pain. When I went to see about the eye pain, they gave me a diagnosis. They said I had dry eye.
Hmm.
I researched dry eye. And then when I researched dry eye, I read all this negative things about how, people were in pain, and then that caused more pain. And so it just kind of just spiraled into this thing that led from this. I almost lost my job because of the anxiety that was associated with it and depression that was associated with it.
Mm-hmm.
So fast forward 10 years, I eventually got past it. I got used to how my changed it. But I had a medical procedure with a dentist and for an implant.
Mm-hmm.
And the anxiety started over again.
Mm-hmm.
The procedure went fine, but I've been having anxiety ever since.
Sure. Yeah. Well, looking back at that first experience, what fear do you think developed at that time?
When I went when I went back to the eye doctor and I realized there was nothing he could do, and then I went back to specialist, and not only could they not do anything about how my vision had changed, but also the pain that may have come from the anxiety, because I didn't have pain after the procedure or
Mm-hmm.
after wearing the contacts. The pain came later in my eyes. I think when they told me that I was going to have to live with it,
Mm-hmm.
it's something that you're going to have to manage.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I went from a healthy person to a unhealthy person,
Right.
like in a short span.
Mm-hmm.
I was very successful in my job. I was moving up in my career. Um, and everything just seemed to change overnight.
Mm-hmm.
So I developed a fear of anything perceived that could become chronic
Right.
when they say there's nothing you can do about it.
Right.
Um, so that's, I think, how the fear developed.
Right. Do you think you developed any kind of a fear around a failed medical procedure and the implications?
Yes.
Okay. Which would then make you wary of any medical procedures and what can happen after. Would that be true?
Yes. But it spiraled past medical procedures.
Yeah.
Say if I was to fall,
Mm-hmm.
most people would accept, discomfort for maybe a day, a week or so. I now say to myself, this fall is going to turn into back pain.
Right.
Um, it kind of went beyond just an experience with the doctor. I kind of started getting the feeling that my body cannot recover from everything that happens.
Right. Yeah.
Some things just you're going to have to learn to live with it, and and I have a hard time accepting that.
Right. Sure. And that's where the health anxiety would come from, is that things could spiral out and may not, you know, uh, bring a return to good health, but you may have to live with something for the rest of your life based on something that has happened.
Yes.
Right. And then so anything that might happen would have you focusing on that injury just to see if something bad is going to happen. You'd agree with that, right?
Yes, and it doesn't have to be a major. It could be minor at this point. It
Right.
could be anything, because when it happened, I wasn't in major pain,
Right.
but somehow the eye, what was going on with my eyes, the headache, it wasn't like major. It was maybe between 1 to 5 at any given time. But that became associated with that injury.
Right.
So it doesn't matter if it's a small sensation. My body goes on high alert.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you perceive that as being a high threat. And of course, that's why the high alert shows up on anything that could jeopardize your normal health. And so that's, this is where these fears come from. So anything that you have to get done from a medical perspective, or if you have an injury, is going to raise that fear, because the brain has learned, this happened, it was really bad, something I have to live with long term. Oh my gosh, what happens if the next thing does the same thing? Or what if it's worse? And so right away, the fear center gets going looking for danger. Even on the suggestion of the notion that that could happen. And that's how these fears get set up, and then they roll. So how does a person overcome that when you've had a negative experience? This is very much like someone who's had an early traumatic experience. It colors the way they view the world from that point on. How we overcome that is by starting to challenge the fears. When the fears start to run down the road of, well, if I fall and I hurt my knee, what if I have back pain, and what if I get shin splints, or it just starts to snowball. This is where you have to rate it in with what is real here. What is the reality that this is going to happen? What's the likelihood that bad things are going to happen from this? And then temper, use the percentage of likelihood to offset the threat. For example, going to the dentist, there's risks in all procedures. Most of them are successful, but some people have negative experiences. So if the procedure was successful, then as we come out, sure, the mind can run down the road. Well, what if this happened? What if they nicked a nerve? And so on and so forth. And away we go. Well, that all triggers anxiousness. So this is where, again, we have to balance that. Let's say, okay, just a minute now. Everything's fine. Everything came out of that fine. The likelihood of that happening to me is remote. So there's no point in me worrying as if it's a high likelihood. I need to temper that with what is the likelihood. What are the chances of that actually happening? This is how we bring the cognitive containment strategy in to say, okay, I'm not going to run down the fear trail, because as you know, from an anxious perspective, we can worry about everything and we can catastrophize about everything, and that just gets the body going, which isn't good for us. So again, we have to balance it with reality. Now, one thing I wanted to add to this is, Carol, you're on the call, and I'm just wondering, how do you deal with the discomfort of the things that you've been through?
Do you mean more so the physical side
Yes.
of things?
Yeah, the physical things, because you've been through a lot of things.
Yeah, it's not easy, because you do tend to get in a mindset of dwelling on them a bit and worrying about the worst case scenario. Mm-hmm. But I soon find that you tend to look around and you think, that there are people with many more worse things to deal with. Mm-hmm. And I think the more times I actually had procedures and the more hospital admissions I had, the more I could see that going on. Mm-hmm. There were more people dealing with a lot of more desperate things than I was dealing with. Mm-hmm. And that helped me to sort of come to terms with how I coped. And I think asking questions is very important. Mm-hmm. Because I would find that I may have a procedure like with this feed tube, and the medical team and the surgeons would come to me and do the stuff and all that, and then they'd go off, and I think, why didn't I ask them that? Mm-hmm. That's going to worry me now. Yeah. And so now I ask the questions. Mm-hmm. Because I think if it's important to know everything that's going on with you. It's your body. You're entitled to know what they're doing and why they're doing it, and what will the after effects be? How long will those problems last? Mm-hmm. So in nerve damage, I've got nerve damage since the car accident ripped the tube out somewhat. Mm. That there is nerve damage, and I said to one surgeon, it's affected my mobility. How is that going to affect in the future? And he said, well, I can't answer your question honestly, Carl, because I don't know, but I think the nerve damage is there, that it may not recover. But and you'd think that would hit me like a ton of bricks, and it was upsetting. But in a way, I'd rather know, mm-hmm. if that makes sense. Yeah. But it does. Every time you go there, you can be worried about it, and you could be anxious about it. I mean, I'm anxious about the fact that I'm waiting for this other procedure now to replace this tube with another one, and I think, oh, what if that goes wrong? Mm-hmm. But being in the ITU and nearly losing my life to the bowel obstruction and everything. Yes, you do get a bit more worried than maybe people who don't, you don't have many health issues to deal with. Mm-hmm. But it's understandable to be worried. But I think it does help the anxiety to find out as much as you can about the situation you're dealing with.
Yeah.
And in what you've gone through, and also what you may have to endure in the future with it.
Yeah.
You know, so you can say, oh, that might happen, but there again, there's a bigger chance that it won't.
Right.
Or that might happen, and when it does, then they're going to help me deal with it.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it actually gives a better perspective. So
yeah.
So Jim, if I was to reduce my hyperstimulation, would that mean that my mind would stop exaggerating the discomfort? Is there a link between me being hyperstimulated and my mind exaggerating, symptoms or what may have happened as a result of an injury or a procedure? Is there a link between that?
There is. There's two factors that are prominent here. Certainly hyperstimulation is one. The more stressed the body is, the more we have a tendency to overreact to things and imagine the worst. That's just where the brain goes. Because, looking at it from a biological perspective, stress hormones will get that amygdala going. That's what they do. That's what they're supposed to do. And of course, as our stress goes up, the amygdala becomes more involved in our daily lives, and the rationalization part of the brain becomes less involved. So we have the amygdala firing off all these dangers and threat signals, and the rationalization area saying, well, wait a minute, but the amygdala is overriding it. So as stress goes up, the amygdala becomes dominant. That's just a fact of life. So if we bring our stress down, then we're not going to be as reactive, and we're more able to just sort of brush things off. So that's one factor. Probably the bigger factor, though, is our fears. What are we saying to ourselves about what just happened? If we've learned to perceive things as threatening, well, that's immediately where the brain's going to go. And so this is where we want to make that cognitive work and calming ourselves down, like Carol said. Get as many questions answered as possible so you have a good understanding. Look at the reality of it. What is the real threat here? Not what I can imagine, because I can imagine all kinds of things, but what is the reality here? And the third thing I would throw into this mix when you're looking at the belief side of things is, as we age, we all deal with health things. That's just the fact of life. In fact, it's more startling than I think a lot of people realize. I was just doing some research on that for another project. And 1 in 2 people above their 50s will have to deal with a medical thing. I think it's 2 out of 3 in their 60s. And almost everybody in their 70s and above is dealing with some health thing that they have to deal with, or multiple. That's just our reality. So, well, it'd be nice to say I'm going to be good and I don't have to worry about these things. As the body deteriorates, we have things we have to deal with. So part of becoming less anxious is developing good coping strategies. Carol, you mentioned one by saying, well, at least I'm not dealing with that. I can manage this, right? Yeah. Because some people have to deal with some. Right. Yeah, some people have to deal with some difficult things. Another part of it, for example, both Marilyn and I have, disabilities now. My, joints, I inherited my father's joints, and so I've had leg issues ever since I was 50. I'm 67 now, so walking on pain for 17 years. Build you some coping strategies. It's not something you would prefer, but that's the reality. And there's certain things I could do to remedy that, but none of them are good options at the moment. So I've been asked to wait, another 2 or 3 years, so that whatever I do get done is going to last me for the rest of my life. So in the meantime, I tolerate pain and discomfort. Marilyn's had a back injury working as a nurse, disabled her back. She's got a failed fusion, so she's been dealing with pain for years as well. So we all have to deal with things that we don't like, but we can still live wonderful lives in spite of them. Sure, there are days.
And these things don't make you feel anxious?
No, because that's the reality I'm dealing with. It's just, this is how it is. And as Carol mentioned, it's interesting you mentioned that. A lot of times I think, well, I have this to deal with, but, there's other people who have to deal with a lot worse and they're doing just fine. So my thing really isn't that bad. So you cope. You learn to cope with the discomfort. You learn to live within your restrictions. I have some restrictions, things I'd like to do that I can't. I learned to live with them, but I can still live a wonderful life in spite of that. And this is what building resilience is all about. I mean, we haven't talked about resilience much at the website yet. We're going to be spending a long time on it because a lot of us from an anxious background want things to be, good. We want things to be good and we want them to last. But that's not our reality. Our reality is we're going to have hardship. And as we age, it gets worse. There's a lot more for us to cope with. So learning to build that resiliency, to be strong and to be happy and content in spite of our difficulties is a way that we can move beyond anxiousness. For me, there's nothing for me to be anxious about. I know what I'm dealing with. I know what the prognosis is, and I know what things I have to do down the road. So now it's just a matter of coping until I get to some viable options should they exist. But this, again, you have to build resiliency. Resilience makes us strong in the face of adversity. Rather than not wanting that adversity, we become strong within it. And it's a really good skill I think all of us need to learn, certainly to enjoy life to the fullest for all the years we have, but also to eliminate anxiety issues.
I think you also you do become more tolerant to pain the more you have a problem.
Yep, absolutely.
Nurses will say to me, because the strongest thing I can take is paracetamol. And I had an open surgery from right the way down through, and they said, please let us give you something stronger, and I said I can't take it. And they said, well, we get people coming in A&E with a stubbed toe when they want stuff. So
That's right.
But eventually you get to the stage where you think, well, I can't take anything. I've just got to cope with this pain, and you do deal with it. Your pain tolerance gets so much different.
Yep.
And
absolutely.
also, like going back to my work with the ambulance and the nursing home, whatever, you'd be amazed at the bravery of some people. And some of them, I remember a lot of them telling me that they were waiting for biopsy results or other serious heart results and things. And they were terribly, terribly anxious. But as soon as they got a diagnosis, whether it was a all clear or whether it was, oh, yes, you've got this, they said they didn't feel so anxious. They knew what they were dealing with. So they could work with it from there. Even those who were told that they had a long treatment plan ahead of them said that all that anticipatory anxiety was much worse.
Yep.
Than now they can work towards whatever the doctors tell them to do.
Yeah. And what I mean, I asked you your opinion right at the beginning, Carol, because you are on both sides of that as a caregiver and on the other side as someone who's had to work through some difficult things. But you're right. I mean, Marilyn and I often talk about our pain issues, and we both laugh at times. We say, well, it's just pain. Whatever. You just move on.
And that's it. Yeah. That's me. Some people say to me, how do you cope with all that pain? And I liken it to, people who go and buy a property near a railway track, for instance. The trains are going by every 10 minutes. And you go there first, and in that train, it drives you crazy. And then somebody will come and see you 6 months down the line, and they'll say, oh, don't those trains drive you mad? You say, what trains?
Yeah, exactly.
It's just like that. And the pain is a bit like that. Unless it really gets you gripping one day, you're thinking, oh, yeah, that does hurt a bit. But to somebody else, probably the next door neighbour, that pain would be excruciating. But it's strange. It's a mind-brain thing to keep you protected and looks after you quite well in certain circumstances.
Yeah. And you're so right about the anticipation. Anticipatory anxiety is often way worse than when we know what we're dealing with, because our brains imagine far worse. And so one of the things that has really helped me over the years is my motto is deal with facts, not fiction. What are the facts? Don't let the mind run down all these worst case scenarios, and deal with what comes, and not worry about all this stuff that I can imagine. So that's really helpful too, especially when you're waiting for results. When you're waiting for results in that moment, you don't have anything. So there's no point in worrying that all the worst case scenarios. When you get the results, then you know what you're dealing with, and you are in a better place to deal with it. Certainly, yeah.
Yeah, and try not to use Dr. Google.
Yes, that's right.
Because Dr. Google is not very good where certain things are concerned. You might have one symptom, and it'll come up with 20 scenarios.
Yep.
And they're all terribly frightening.
That's right. Yes.
It doesn't mean that.
Yeah. So, Carol,
How do you deal with that?
Did that, provide? I know it's not the same as saying, well, it's all going to go in, you're going to be fine, but that's unrealistic.
Well, I'm wondering, as I listen to you, and I mean, this is very enlightening how you all put a perspective of pain and discomfort, and I'm wondering if there's a mistake that I've been making as I've been dealing with this. When I started sensations and feelings, and I realized that it was anxiety I was dealing with. I have a very high stress job, but I do like what I do. But I like when I'm able to do it at my best. But in dealing with this anxiety and the feelings of fear that was coming over me, I kind of pulled back from my daily activity. The stress was still there, but I kind of pulled back from my role. I kind of pulled back from a lot of my relationships too because of the depression. So I haven't really, I think I was told it was kind of like all or nothing thinking. I'm kind of waiting for the feelings to go away before I jump back into life.
Right.
And I'm kind of wondering now if maybe the actions being engaged in my life is part of what's keeping the anxiety going and the fear going. Is there a possibility? Because I actually thought that I should just relax.
I would say that,
away.
sorry, love. I would say that old scenario, feel the fear and do it anyway, sometimes.
Yeah.
Is a good way to approach things.
Feel the fear and do it.
Feel the fear and do it anyway. And it could, because sometimes, even if you think you can't do it because the pain's so bad or the worry's so bad, you'll be actually surprised at what you can still achieve with health issues.
Yeah.
Or even worrying about health issues. It's amazing what some people do. Some people with awful, things that you think you couldn't cope with or disabilities, they go on and have amazing lives. It's wonderful to see it sometimes.
Yeah. It's all attitude when you think about it. I also wanted to just touch on your comment, and I would agree with you. A common mistake that a lot of people make is, first off, is villainizing stress. We have a couple of articles, I think there's 2 or 3 articles we have in the chapter 14 about we don't want to distress about stress. Stress is not our enemy. Stress is not a bad thing. I mean, we've heard for years that stress kills and all these kind of things, but there are 2 sides to this stress thing. You have the stress that we get from, enjoying our lives, enjoying a wonderful job. Sure, it might become with some stress and pressures or whatever, but, it's thrilling to us. That thrill is a stressor. So it's not negative stress. What happens when we're fearful, that changes the stress component a little bit, changes the different chemistry, so it has a bit more of an impact, but we don't want to be afraid of stress. Our symptoms are caused by stimulation, overstimulation. We can become overstimulated by doing something exhilarating that we absolutely love to do day after day after day without resting the body. So it's not negative stress. In fact, stress allows us to do a lot of things. It pushes us to succeed. It drives us to do better. There's a lot of good things that stress brings. So we don't want to view stress as being a bad thing. It's just stress. Again, our symptoms come from the stimulation of stress. If we don't give the body sufficient rest, it's going to be stimulated. That's where our symptoms come from. So in your case, you don't want to, pull back and isolate until all of your symptoms are gone and then go back into the community and things you love to do. Why? Because sometimes we can wait, and that's even worse than us going back and living life anyway. This is why we always say, engage in your life the best you can. Just, make sure you're building in sufficient rest to let the body recover from that stimulation. Remember, again, our symptoms are from hyperstimulation, not negative stress. It's just, we just go too hard. So if we offset our life a little bit by building in more rest, the body will recover no matter what. And in the meantime, as long as the body's hyperstimulated, it will present symptoms. That's just what it does when it's overly stimulated. But that doesn't matter. We can still function. As Carol was saying, we can still do things. We just want to make sure we're giving the body a little bit more rest than normal so that it can catch up and calm down, and away we go again. So I think there is a mistake in, pulling back and waiting till all the symptoms are gone and then going back. I prefer that you just live your life as normal, just err on the side of giving your body more rest.
And your body will tell you. Your body will tell you when, give me an hour to have a chill out rest time. And then you're okay to move on again and do it like that, because it's far more rewarding for you as well. I mean, Jim will tell you the same. There were times when I used to contact him when I was at work saying I can't do this and these thoughts were frightening me and everything else. But I never once left my job because of it. I thought, no, I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna keep going no matter what. Yes, sometimes I push myself too hard and I need for it, and I'll still do that sometimes if I've got pain, and maybe one of the family would like something, and I'd want to do it and help and everything. But I realise after, well, maybe I shouldn't have just done that today. I should have said tomorrow. So I still do those things and make those mistakes sometimes. But you do generally, as a rule, find out what you can do and how long you can do it for, and when is the time to take a little break.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I suggest live your life. Live your life in spite of how your feelings are. Just err on the side of rest, giving your body more time to catch up, and you'll be just fine.
Okay. Thank you. This was very helpful. Thanks, Carol and Jim.
Now, the one last thing I wanted to mention here, too. I keep saying one last. There's probably a few. But, you have that fear in the back of your minds when these things happen. So if you do have an injury, if you do need a procedure, just recognize your brain is going to dig that up. It's going to remind you. It's going to run you down all these fear trails. This is where you have to say, no, I'm not going to do that. I know it's a learned pattern here, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to take what comes, and I'm going to learn to cope with what comes instead of imagining all the things that can happen. And because one of the reasons we experience symptoms in the area that we've injured is because that's where our attention is. And even if we're completely healthy, not overstimulated at all, and we start to focus on a certain spot of the body, you're going to start to notice sensations you've never noticed before, because a lot of them go by invisibly. We don't pay attention to them because that's not where our focus is. So another part of this is recognizing that your focus is often bringing some of these up to your attention, not because they're actually there, but because now you're paying attention to what that part feels like.
So you're saying that if I keep on containing, living my life and going through, I don't want to say the motions, I would rather say living life, that my brain will start, that alarm system will start getting lighter and lighter and lighter. And I probably will start noticing that I don't notice things that I used to notice.
That could be a likelihood, but because there's a fear there, I think that belief system is already set up, or your body's going to automatically go there. So you're going to have to retrain yourself to take your attention away from that and stop yourself from running down those worry trails. As you do that, and as you become more comfortable doing that, and as you get more evidence saying, well, nothing's really happened over the last 20 episodes, so I'm not going to worry about it, it gets easier and easier. But it's going to be the combination of bringing hyperstimulation down and changing your thinking.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Distraction also, I think, don't you, Jim, can be a good thing and a positive thing sometimes.
Oh, wonderful.
We used to use that in medicine. You would go to someone who maybe had an accident, got a really bad fracture or something, especially children and things. They would be focused on that. But with a little bit of distraction and everything, they start talking about other stuff.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden they forget, oh, I've got a bad leg, I forgot that.
Yeah.
And then, it takes it away from that. And in the other scenario, how the brain is so strange is you could go to a patient and they've got a terrible, terrible injury. And they haven't actually seen it yet. So they're fine and they're laughing with other people and they're fine. They're just saying, maybe I can't get up or whatever. But the minute they actually look at that injury, they scream and they're in pain, and it's terrible pain. It's a funny way how your brain and mind interprets things. So distraction, by all means, is a great thing.
Yep.
And it works. In the beginning when you start doing it, you'll still be having stuff fluctuating in, but eventually you'll think, oh, I quite enjoy doing that. I even whatever it was, a hobby or whatever, I quite enjoyed doing that, and I forgot about that for a while. So you can try that. It's not going to work every time, but I always recommend it. I've seen it work a lot on people and also done it myself. So try that, see if it helps.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. There's a lot of people who go through, have a negative experience with health and then develop, health fears down the road. But one way we overcome the anxiety of those things is, again, deal with facts, not fiction. And also another thing that, well, for example, I'm just going to back up here a little before I say this. Why anxious people worry and why non-anxious people don't is non-anxious people, when they are raised in an environment and they're raised with good parenting, they learn to deal with adversity. And so they come to a belief that says, well, no matter what happens, I can do this or I can cope. That's the mindset. When we come from an anxious background and we have parenting that sets us up to be anxious, well, then we have that threat that says, well, what if I can't? Or I can't do this. I just can't. I won't be able to manage the pain. I won't be able to stand. So that's our mindset. So the attitude shifts in a different direction. So rather than saying, I'm going to cope no matter what happens, I'm good, we say, oh my gosh, what happens if this happens? And we imagine all the worst case scenarios. So we want to change that early programming by developing an attitude that, well, I'm going to learn to cope. I'm going to take this opportunity, as difficult as it is, and I'm going to learn how to cope with this because my focus is on living a good life no matter what happens. And if that becomes our mindset, then the threats that we imagine become way less because we already have a preconceived notion that, well, no matter what comes my way, I'm going to cope and I can still live a good life. So something to work on is adopting that attitude. I'm going to cope. No matter what happens, I'm going to cope because we all have to at some point. As we get older, the body starts breaking down and we all have to cope with things that we don't necessarily want or like, but we can still live a wonderful life despite them. So that's the overall message.
You also find you become an expert in whatever's wrong with you.
Yes.
and then you're able to help other people. So
that's right.
That's one positive thing. If anybody told me I would have a feed tube and all that a few years ago, I'd say, no, I help people with them, but I'm not going to have one. Yes. But now I can not only help people with them, I can tell them exactly what it's like.
That's so, right, yes.
There's positives with it as well, that you can do good.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm looking for the obvious reassurance response, Jim, but you've come across people who have been able to lose this type of fear through this practice?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, both myself and Marilyn are two good examples for you. Both highly anxious people when we started. In fact, one of my worst fears early on was a health concern. My threat was, what if I have something I can't deal with and I don't like it and I have to live with it for the rest of my life? Then what? Well, guess what? I have it and it's no really big deal. So.
Wow. Okay.
I don't even think about it much. Yeah. Yeah. And it takes work. Because we have a belief system that's set up early. But as we start to challenge those beliefs with healthy beliefs, well, then they change and all of a sudden we're not getting automatically triggered. So that's a good thing. One other thing I wanted to add here, and this is probably for everybody listening. One of the best ways to reduce anxiety and stress, especially about things we're dealing with, is to help others. I know this sounds kind of superficial, but there is really good research to show that part of our stress response has something called the tend and befriend response. It's when we're in danger, we want to help others. That's part of what the body does in response to a threat. And one of the best ways to start bringing those anxieties down is to start interacting with others, start helping them, because helping uses that chemistry in a positive way. Fretting uses it in a negative way, but helping others uses it in a positive way. A lot of people see great reductions in their anxiety and stress just by helping others. And it's not for anything other than the fact that we feel better when we give and help others. So that's something, if you have an opportunity to do that in your own life, that's another way to move beyond this.
Okay.
I suggest try it. Find ways that maybe you can use your resources you have to help others and see how you feel in a little while. I think you'll find that resilience really starts to grow when we start to do that.
Yeah, the saying is there's more happiness in giving than receiving. So there probably is something it takes the focus off yourself, no doubt, at a minimum. Okay.
And it is biologically proven. That is a biological fact. We're going to be talking more about that in the future, too, as we get caught up. But there is, a certain chemical change that happens in us when we give to others, and that's why we feel better. It raises those feel-good hormones.
All right. Thanks again. Thanks, Jim and Carol, for your input and feedback.
You're welcome.
And I hope I didn't take too long, but thank you.
Oh, no, not a problem. No, pleasure to help.
Very welcome.